Welcome to Tales of Hope, where every paw print counts. Anil, Matai in the house, spreading love, hear the sounds. Every week animal stories, rights and welfare in the mix. Step up, take action, we're giving animals a fix. Tales of Hope, raise your voice, make some noise. Change the game for every animal, girl and boy. One world, one fight, let's turn the page. A future for the voiceless, bring hope to center stage.
A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our listeners wherever you are in the world. Today, we have a very interesting person with us on the show, Jamie McLaughlin, who is an animal law and environmental law attorney. She is the founder and the president of Three Pearls Charity, a nonprofit that addresses issues at the intersection of animal welfare, social justice, and the environment. Jamie has worked with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, Humane World for Animals, and other non-profits. She is an associate attorney for Nonhuman Rights Project. Jamie also serves as the vice chair for ABA-ILS International Animal Law Committee, and she is vice chair of the Missouri Bar Council Bar Association Animal Law Committee. She received her JD with a certificate in public interest law from DePaul University College of Law in Chicago, Illinois. Jamie is received both as an animal law LLM and an environmental law LLM, cum laude from Lewis and Clark School in Portland and Oregon. Now, Jamie, that is some achievement. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Anil. It's good to be here.
Now, Jamie, thank you for taking the time out from your busy schedule to be with us on the show. Without further ado, I'm going to ask you the first question that goes in. How has U.S. animal protection law evolved to regulate or fail to regulate factory farming, and what lessons can India learn from the experience?
That's a good question. So we have a handful of laws that apply to animals in the United States. The primary one is the Animal Welfare Act, and that sets out the care of a lot of different animals, but unfortunately it excludes farmed animals and animals used in research. So it doesn't protect them from a lot of the horrors that they face in industrial animal agriculture. There's a transportation law for moving farmed animals to slaughter, and that is the 28-hour law. However, it doesn't apply to poultry. It specifies that animals have to be fed and rested after 28 hours. However, if they've got food and water in the transport carrier, they don't have to be rested. But we see a lot of times that there might be food and water available, but the animals are packed in so tight they can't even reach the food during the transport. So also it's rarely ever enforced. There's also the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, and that is a requirement that when animals are slaughtered, they must be stunned. But again, it excludes poultry, and it also excludes ritual slaughter. And then there are some other environmental laws and some state laws that we can talk about too.
Wow, that was some enlightening, words for me, because I really didn't know that, these are the kind of laws that existed, because I think in India, as you rightly said, even in US, they are not properly enforced. And I think in India, I don't know whether I should say that or not, because even, animal cruelty laws are not properly enforced around here. Anyways, now, the US has federal laws like Clean Water Act and state level right to farm laws. How do these intersect with factory farming, and how might similar dynamics play out in India?
Well, the Clean Water Act is an federal environmental law in the United States, and it covers the waterways of the United States, and it sets water quality standards, and it requires permits for certain discharges. And concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, that have a lot of animals, large and medium-sized CAFOs, if they discharge, they have to have a permit. And sometimes the smaller CAFOs can also require a permit if they're discharging. They're considered a point source of discharge. So the only issue is that when there are storms, so if you have a heavy storm or something like that, and there's a lot of runoff from the agriculture complex, that is excluded. So that is a way that contaminants can get into waterways, but still not be a violation of the permit. The great thing about this law, though, is that it has a citizen suit provision, and that means that a citizen can sue the bad actor. Not all laws in the United States allow that, but some of our environmental laws do. So there are a lot of requirements that a citizen has to meet to be able to bring a Clean Water Act case. They have to say who, what, and where the violation was, what the violation was, who is responsible for that, and then they have to identify themselves as the people bringing the lawsuit. There is a 60-day notice requirement, though. So when you want to bring the suit, you have to provide notice. And it's not just notice to the people that you're going to sue. It's also notice to the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, as well as state or local government that governs discharge and water pollution. So the 60-day window is a really great mechanism, though, because what it allows is for the bad actor to cure their behavior. And it also provides notice for the EPA if they were not aware that this was happening. And the complainant can step into the shoes of the government and bring the case, but this gives the EPA a chance to take over the case if they want to. So it's great because it allows a lot of people to settle or stop the behavior. So not a lot of these go to court, as a matter of fact.
This is a very interesting thing, what you mentioned. You have the 60-day period where the bad actor has, or the stakeholder has, an opportunity to rectify, which is a very good thing. And I don't know how many of these cases, I'm sure you would be better judge of this, to tell us, how many of these, when you see in the legal recourse, how many of them actually modify their behavior so that, it changes, or they pay heed to the environment?
So I don't know the exact numbers. Yeah.
But just the ballpark.
Sure, is that the EPA does bring cases against factory farms and ask them to modify their behavior, but the EPA is a little bit short on rules in this area when it applies to CAFOs. So a recent case did call out the EPA for that, and so the EPA is doing some research right now to see how they should regulate CAFOs. But this should have been done a long time ago because this has been an ongoing problem.
I think it's not only in your country, even in our country, we have that problem that has been ongoing since 1960s, because we're still into the, all our PCA acts and everything is still outdated, to be honest. Now, what are some landmark U.S. animal law cases or campaigns that reshaped public opinion or legislation on factory farming?
Well, there's a lot of pushback. We have a very strong and well-funded industrial animal agriculture complex here in the United States, and they're very entrenched, and they are, like I said, very powerful. One way to combat this, though, is through state ballot initiatives. So some states in the United States have a ballot initiative process where you can try to get something in front of the voters during an election. And you have to get a lot of signatures and stuff like that, and then you can get it on the ballot. And there was Proposition 12 in the state of California, and it was a ballot initiative to change and improve animal welfare for certain farmed animals, and that included gestating sows and gestation crates, which we know are very confined and the pigs can't even turn around. Veal crates for veal calves. Veal calves are male calves from the dairy industry that don't serve any purpose to the dairy industry, and so they're often kept in small crates so they can't move around, and then their flesh does not turn a darker color. It stays very pale, and it's considered kind of like a delicacy in cuisine. So it's a very cruel husbandry practice to maintain that white meat. Another confinement issue is battery cages for egg-laying hens. So a lot of times egg-laying hens are stuffed in a small space with other chickens where they have less than a sheet of paper size portion of that cage. So they can't even spread their wings or move around very well. So what Proposition 12 did is it said, California doesn't, the voters of California don't like these practices. And so these are not going to be allowed in California. And not only are they not going to be allowed for raising animals for food in California, they're also not going to be allowed for imported products into California. And this proposition passed. And so what that means, if somebody has chickens and they're laying eggs in Iowa, if they use battery cages in Iowa, those eggs can't be imported or sold in California. There was a lot of pushback to this, and there were multiple federal legislative bills that have not passed yet to try to make it difficult for states like California, and also Massachusetts had something called Question 3, which was very similar to increase animal welfare for farmed animals. So we had the EATS Act, and now we have something called the Save Our Bacon Act. And federal law in the United States, of course, overrules state law. It supersedes state law. So if this were to pass, it would make those ballot initiatives obsolete. But unfortunately, it's written in a way that's somewhat vague. So it's going to open up a lot of litigation, and it's a disadvantage to the people that have already made these moves to make welfare improvements in their facilities. And also it's going to impact things like transportation of animals, whatever the rules are as far as vaccination of those animals. It could create all types of regulatory gaps, basically. So this hasn't passed yet, but we don't know where it's going to go.
Well, I'll be honest. My first thought was, how cruel the world is, to be honest. But at the same time, it is such an eye-opener with the kind of things you mentioned, which a lot of people don't see it with their own eyes. It is for people to see and feel. Imagine we were put in those situations or in those conditions, how would we survive? But I think we humans, as they say, we are the dangerous species on this planet. Sorry to say.
Yeah, I will also say that the industry hides the practices in the United States. So most people think that animals are growing up in little red barns. They are happy. They get to run around and scratch in the dirt and enjoy themselves. They don't really understand the confined conditions and the practices, the normal animal husbandry practices that occur in factory farming.
At least I'll be very upfront about this. I have spoken to a couple of people, legal people in India itself. And some of them, the kind of nightmares, what they have spoken about, especially in India, we have this cow farming. I mean, we have the dairy farms, the chickens, and even, the poultry is really, really in a messed up state. Even though you do see it on the streets, like what you talk about, transportation, you can see how these chickens are all, clustered. They don't have even, I would say they don't even have space to breathe properly, when you see them transporting. But in India, I think we still tend to give a blind eye because, I'll be honest, the politicians are corrupt. Nobody wants to do with anything with the animals, because if you go to the legislatures, they will all talk about, we've already got a lot of other issues. Why do we want to burden ourselves with this animal issue now. So I think over here, I'll be very honest, there is a lack of willingness to do things, because what I hear from you, at least you have these options of going into ballot and trying to bring a change. But I think over here, it's going to be a long way.
Well, I think the legislature needs to understand that it's not just an animal problem.
Yes.
That's something we can talk about. And, seeing animals in these conditions often desensitizes people to pain and suffering. We know here in the United States that slaughterhouse workers, they can be perpetrators of domestic violence because they are constantly, killing animals. It's desensitizing them to the feelings of others. It leads to other problems too. So there's a link between all of these issues. There's a social portion of the problem. It's not just about the animals. And I would hope that if the legislature understands that they would make it a higher priority.
You just rightly mentioned it. I was just speaking to somebody just about a week back from UK, Mr. Mark Randall, who works in this area, who's been a police officer and a detective, a homicide detective in UK, and he's the fifth generation. And he was very clear that all these crimes that take place, if you investigate it, in deeper sense, you will always see that it has something to do with animal cruelty. And I was surprised with the kind of information and the research that he was sharing with me. And I realized in India, I think we have, I'll be very honest and upfront about it. I think in India, we've forgotten about it, because I'll give you a small example, what Mark was, explaining to me, that if a child sees these abuse, animal cruelty at an early age, and when he grows up, there is a high likelihood that either he would commit a domestic violence or to his spouse or, people near him. And he's like, because he was talking from his experience of all these years, and he was like, if you dig deeper into the case, you definitely find the link. And there were a couple of cases where he was mentioning when a spouse or a couple are having fight, and if they have an animal in the house, there is definitely going to be an animal cruelty if he wants to bring back, the partner back home or whatever it is. And he said, those are the cases which lead to a lot of cruelty. So if you look at animal cruelty, it does lead to all this crimes that are related to domestic crimes, to your spouses or to even your parents, and it is a danger to the society. But I think in India we have still not looked at that aspect very clearly.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of times the link is basically talked about between companion animals and human. And we forget about other animals that might not be our own companions. It could be things like children witnessing the culling of street dogs. Maybe those animals are animals that they played with during the day or had bonded with, even though they were stray dogs. It impacts those children. And also when it comes to farmed animals, when children are little, they don't understand necessarily that a different species of animal has less value to grown-ups than a companion animal does. So all of these different abuses can impact society. It's not just companion animal violence, it's also farmed animal violence.
Absolutely, 100% agreed with you. I'll give you a small example of myself. I think I might have been just 14 or 15 years old. And at that time in our house, we used to eat meat, everybody in the house, we used to eat, but except my mom. And I remember one of the days I went to the butcher's shop to, get meat. And that's where I saw the culling of a goat happening. And you won't believe it. That was the day I stopped eating. after that day, I think till date, I've been a vegetarian. It's because of the spirituality as well. But what I saw with the kind of torture that was going on for that animal to satisfy our taste buds, uh, to me, it didn't feel right. And I
Yeah.
think it's been what, about 35, 37 plus years. I have stuck to being vegetarian,
Yeah, it makes a big impression, especially on children.
Absolutely.
They never forget.
It, there are, I mean, I don't want to get into it, but there are nights I can still, that thing still can haunt me at times because I still see that culling happening. And that was not a very good scene to see. And that's why
Yeah.
I think, every parent should at least, I believe every parent should at least take their child once to see this culling, because after that, I don't think anybody would ever put that meat on their table or a plate just to satisfy their palates. Anyways, why are American companies expanding factory farming in India despite clear evidence of environmental and health harms in the US?
Well, there's one major reason, and that's money, growth, satisfying shareholders, essentially, unless they're a private company and they're just trying to, increase their profits. The US market is fairly saturated at this point. Factory farming has been in place for many years here, and corporations are looking to the global south to see where they could develop and make more money. So in the US, these systems are vertically integrated. What that means is that this big company will own the whole process. So the big company will often have the gestation crates for the pigs and have the baby pigs, or the, whatever the baby is, chickens or whatever. And then they truck them to a contract grower. And the contract grower provides care and feed for those animals to get them to market weight or ready for slaughter. Now, the contract that the grower has is dictated by the company that they work for. So it's not negotiable. It will tell them what they have to feed the animals, what kind of antibiotics and medications they have to give them. Everything is dictated in the contract. When the animals reach market weight, then the corporation comes and picks them up and takes them to often corporate-owned slaughterhouses, where they are turned into shelf products that the corporation then delivers to grocery stores. So this model is considered, efficient, and it can feed the world. However, it's really destructive, and we've seen that happen in the United States. We've had a lot of environmental issues because of these factory farms. And because the market is saturated here, they're looking for other places to sell their stuff. So that includes things like feed for the animals, antibiotic for the animals, like all of the things that go into the system. They're looking for new markets for that.
I think with the kind of population and what we have in India, it could be a very lucrative market for all of them, until and unless our people in power or the people in the politics understand that it's not all about money. It's also the kind of harm that we're going to be causing to the environment. But let's keep our fingers crossed, and I hope we could just, wake some ears up and let them listen to what this all means in the longer run. Now, how does the export of these industrial systems reflect a form of corporate colonism, and what can Indian policymakers do to resist it?
That's a really good question. So, in India, there's a lot of practice of vegetarianism. There's about 8% Hindu population, and vegetarianism is part of that. Although different statistics say that Indians maybe be 20 to 30% vegetarian. So there's statistics all over the place that say how many people are vegetarian, but India is a huge milk producer.
Yes.
Well, the practice in the United States has been dictated by the industry, and they're looking to do that in India. They want to increase consumption. So in order to do that, they could do what they've done in the United States, which is normalize the consumption of meat or animal products at least 3 times a day. Now, formerly in the United States, we might have meat on a Sunday dinner, like it was a special thing. But when the industry turned to factory farming and its high production level and government subsidies, they were able to make meat cheaper and normalize the fact that you should have meat on your plate as the center of the plate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So there is an increased urbanization in India and increasing incomes. So when those urban people are making more money, they're going to have these corporations telling them that you need to consume more of these things. That's a symbol of success. And it's, not the tradition of Hinduism or the people of India, but it will be imposed by these corporations that want to kind of get into this area and make new traditions or change, how Indians eat. And that has happened in the US. It's taken, several years, like a few generations to make this normalized, but it could happen in India as well. Dairy is huge in India, and these corporations really want to expand dairy farming. So this is a way to do that.
I'm just going to stop here and say one thing. Yes, we Indians are, most of us are Hindus, or we believe a lot of things of being vegetarianism and stuff like that. But recently, I think about a week back, there was this report that said India was the second largest beef exporter. So we are already in that state. Maybe it is not for the local consumption, but imagine where in India we consider cow to be as holy. For us, most of the Hindus, the cow is a holy thing. And even though most of our politicians, policymakers talk about it, that, cow is holy, but on the other hand, as you rightly said, with the kind of money involved and with these corporations, we are already there. As I said, India was the second largest exporter of beef, and with the kind of amount they were mentioning, I can pull that up very soon. And sorry.
The beef being exported is primarily Cara beef, which is buffalo meat. Those buffaloes are also used in the dairy industry.
Yes, absolutely. And imagine, here we are trying to talk about being vegetarian and being holy, but because of the kind of the greenback or the dollars that they see, they've been doing it. And, I'm sure it's going to be very hard for us, to reach the people and the policymakers to make them understand what it means to the environment and to being human as well. Now, in your experience, what strategies have US advocacy groups used effectively to push back against corporate lobbying? And could these be applied in India?
Well, I think that there are really 3 main ways to go at it. One is legislative. Another one is through lawsuits, like strategic impact litigation. And then the third is really grassroots activism. And all of those different things serve different purposes, those different methods. And they all add something very important. All of them are needed to work together to make change. You can't just do one of them. So you might have a grassroots activist that tries to do something and it doesn't work, and then they get a lawyer involved and bring a lawsuit, bring attention to it, and try to pass legislation. So you need both bottom up and top down work to make that happen. And I believe that there's more advocacy groups in India now and people learning about animal law. And with that knowledge comes the ability to try to implement some of these things to make a difference.
You rightly said, it needs to be right from top to bottom. And yes, there currently we have a lot of advocacy groups who have been lobbying for a lot of things, because I mean, on my journey, what I have been trying to do is I've been meeting a lot of people, and yes, I have been talking to a lot of these people who have been trying for the last 5 years, 10 years, against factory farming and things like that. Because yes, in India, I'll be very upfront about it. We are in a very sad state of factory farming as well, especially when it comes to animals. Now, what have been the most devastating environmental impact of factory farms in the US, and how are they relevant to India's ecosystem?
Well, probably the most prevalent devastating impact is just the environmental pollution that's coming from these CAFOs. So when you have a concentrated animal feeding operation, you have a lot of animals all together, densely packed into a tight space. And what that creates is a lot of waste or excrement from these animals. That waste includes pathogens like E. coli. It's got hormones that were used to feed those animals. It could have antibiotics that they give the animals to keep them from getting sick. It can have chemical additives to the manure. It could even have animal blood in it. And those that waste for a dairy farm is specifically kept in what's called a lagoon. It's like a pool of waste that's adjacent to the facility. Those are typically lined with some sort of liner to keep them from leaking, but that doesn't necessarily stop them from leaking and getting into the groundwater. Also, when you have heavy rains that could spill out of the lagoon, the waste is also spread over crops and fields as a fertilizer. The nitrogen and phosphorus from that can get into the groundwater. It can, cause cancer in local populations and stuff like that. And worst of all, when we have extreme weather events, for example, a lot of these CAFOs are located on floodplains or low-lying areas, and especially those that are along our coast. If we have a hurricane or something like that, if these are low-lying, these CAFOs can be completely flooded, and that releases everything that's in that manure pool or lagoon. And it also is horrific for the animals, who are often trapped in confined situations and drown as a result. Those are really devastating events for our environment, but they're huge animal welfare issues, and they're social justice issues for the local communities that suffer the impacts of all of that devastation.
That's a very scary one. And I think we've just witnessed one very recently because of the heavy rains that were there. A whole lot of, farmlands being destroyed, animals being misplaced. We've had it in two places. Punjab, the up north was very, very badly devastated. They are still trying to recover. And that's also one of the places where a lot of animals and factory farms are there.
Yeah, I agree. Factory farms themselves release gases that lead to climate change. And we're, saturated with those places here in the United States, but it's impacting the rest of the world too, because those greenhouse gases are in the same planet that we all live on. And as we increase factory farming in places like India and other global south countries, we're just going to exacerbate that and create more extreme weather. And in India, with the monsoon season, having more extreme weather and combined with CAFOs is really a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. I mean, it's already there, as I mentioned, recently, even in the state that I am in the West, Maharashtra, most of the farmlands were destroyed. The animals were misplaced. There was a whole lot of calamity that we've just gone through in the last 2 weeks itself. And the worst was, of all, I think the places worst was up north Punjab, which was really, really badly affected. And luckily, the people up there are, are very animal friendly. They were doing a lot of the best they could. But yes, it is a recipe and a lesson for our politicians and people in power, the stakeholders, to really look at it with a different perspective. Until and unless they don't do it, I think we're heading for a doomsday, to be honest.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
It is. Now, could you explain how factory farms contribute to public health crisis, including antibiotic resistance, zoonotic diseases, food and safety issues?
Yeah, so we have a lot of public health crisis here in the United States caused by not just the industrial system, but the increased consumption of the products that we have been taught to eat 3 times a day. Just from a public health perspective, as far as consumption, we have an obesity epidemic here. We have diabetes, we have cardiovascular issues, and things like that. These are all directly linked to increased cholesterol, meat consumption, and dairy products, and all of these animal products that Americans overconsume. From an industrial standpoint, like at the locale, you have issues including zoonotic disease, cancer, and stuff like that, and antibiotic resistance. So antibiotic resistance in these animals happens because feed that is created for the animals includes antibiotics to keep the animals from getting sick. But what this does is it increases everybody's tolerance and resistance to those drugs. So we have different strains of infections here that can't be treated as easily with antibiotics in the United States anymore because of the prevalence of antibiotics in animals, in our water that gets into there, in our food system. And that could happen in India, especially if a contract farming model is adapted, like the vertical integration that we talked about, because those integrators will dictate what the contract farmers must feed to the animals. And a lot of these feeds, they're genetically modified feeds, and they are made specifically to try to fatten animals faster or get them to produce more milk or eggs or whatever it is. That also includes antibiotics and hormones and stuff like that, which gets into our food system. So that's a problem. Zoonotic diseases occur when diseases mutate and jump between species. It might not start out in a cow and go straight to humans. It could be something like we have with avian influenza in the United States, where chickens were infected from wild ducks and other waterfowl, and then the chickens infected dairy cattle, and we saw those symptoms in dairy cattle way over a year ago, and the AVMA couldn't figure out what was wrong with these cattle until they figured out it was avian influenza. It causes those dairy cattle to have stillbirths and have all of these terrible symptoms, and those diseases can mutate and jump to humans. And if that happens, we're looking at another pandemic situation like we had with COVID-19. So increasing the stocking density of animals and putting them all together really creates a cesspool and a petri dish of bad things that could be transferred from them to us.
Jamie, just out of context, are there journals which publish or create awareness about all these things?
Yeah, we have a lot of legal journals that talk about things like that. There are also medical journals, and you would even be able to find some of this information potentially in agriculture journals, because they're very aware of the spread of these diseases in their flocks and other animals and the costs to them and the ways to mitigate that. There is some resistance, for example, to vaccinate animals because that makes the meat or products not eligible for export to certain EU countries and stuff like that. So there's always this push and pull between the danger to the public and the economic benefit of these companies that are trying to make the money from it. But yeah, you can read about these topics in lots of different places.
Perfect. No, because I think for our viewers, to to basically enlighten them of things which we are not aware of. To be honest, even I was not aware of a lot of things, but this has been a very, enlightening session for me even. So that's the reason it's like, trying to reach out to people and make them understand what this is all about. Now,
yeah, it's a complex topic. I would encourage your listeners to view this on your YouTube channel because I provided some visual aids and resources for them to view there. So take a look at that if you want some more information, and some of the stuff I'm talking about is outlined as well.
Absolutely. We're going to put that all out. Now, India is still battling malnutrition in many areas. Does the push towards meat-heavy diets through factory farming deepen or solve this problem?
It really deepens the problem. It's hard for me to say as someone that is in the US. It's not for me to determine what is right for India. But what I can say is if you look at the example that we have here and the increase in health issues related to consumption of these products, we know that there is a link between the products and increased illnesses and other things like we've already talked about, which is the obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and all the things that go along with that. There are a lot of other things that can be triggered by those problems, and it really decreases quality of life. It shortens life. So this is the model that India would be moving to if it adopts some of these practices and starts eating meat and dairy 3 times a day. There are a lot of wholesome, nutritional, plant-based foods that have all the nutrients that we need. We are just told by the industry that we can't get those from plant-based products. There's a lot of misinformation there, and especially they like to tout these things when it comes to feeding people's children, because people are very sensitive about making sure that their children get enough nutrition and proper nutrition. But this is not the necessary way to get that nutrition for kids. There are a lot of different ways to get it without eating meat.
Absolutely. You rightly mentioned it. I think, what you rightly pointed out, it is more towards the children. And I think not the root cause, but I would say, it's the pediatrics in India who need to understand that the plant-based diet is as good as, not as good, but I would say it's better than, going in for a meat-based diet. But I think we need to, it's more of, putting it across to these practitioners, because they are the first point of contact for these parents. So if they understand it and if they are well educated and aware of it, I think, we can definitely bring in a change, if I'm not mistaken.
It's hard to combat the industry when they are producing all of these commercials showing kids drinking milk and eating dairy and stuff like that. That really ingrains upon the consumer that those things are important. And then if other people in your community are doing it, you feel strange that you're not doing it, and you feel like you might be missing something, your child might be missing something, or doing the wrong thing. So it creates a lot of social pressure too.
Absolutely. I think they have deeper pockets than all of us, to be honest.
They do.
Jamie, India reveres the cow in cultural and spiritual terms, yet cows are abandoned, illegally transported, and slaughtered. How does this contradiction compare with American paradoxes around animals?
So in the United States, there's all types of religions. We have a very diverse population here, but we're considered a Christian country. I think the statistic is something like 60% or 62% are Christian. And animals aren't necessarily revered in any way here. However, in Genesis, there's a biblical line that says that man has dominion over all of the animals. And often this idea of dominion has been touted in order to make an excuse of why we can do what we want, using them for food and fiber because the Bible says so. But what it doesn't say, dominion is not equivalent to torture. And a lot of the things that we're doing to animals are are torture. So those things shouldn't be conflated. And when you look at India and the issue with the beef exports and stray cattle and stuff like that, a lot of these animals, they are cast-offs of the dairy industry. That's how they end up where they end up, whether they're animals that stop producing or if they are animals that were just born the wrong gender that doesn't give milk, and then they're abandoned as well. When it comes to scaling up that industry, CAFOs in the United States, or large CAFOs, consist of about 700 or more dairy cattle. That's the standard for a large CAFO. But in India right now, about, over 90% of people that have cows and use them for milk are smallholders. So they might have between 1 and 5 cattle. A large dairy in India would be over 300 cattle. And even with over 90% of the population owning, cattle for dairy are smallholders, with 1 to 5 cattle, there are over 5 million stray cattle in India. So those are on city streets, they are roaming garbage dumps, they are all over the place. And this is not necessarily how we would want to treat animals. I mean, they don't want to kill the animals when they can't produce dairy anymore. There are some places to put those animals, like some sanctuaries. But if you consider how many there are roaming the streets now, they don't even fit in the sanctuaries as the current population stands. So if you try to scale up dairy and take people from being, smallholders of 1 to 5 cattle to 100 cattle or 300 cattle, what is that going to produce? Now, there is, these animals are bred through artificial insemination, and there is genetic selection to try to select females, but, it's not guaranteed and it's very expensive. So it's going to exacerbate the problem of stray and abandoned cattle. And, what's the answer to that as far as the religious context and how cattle should be treated?
That's something that we all need to consider seriously, and especially in our country, the people, the stakeholders really, really need to be educated. And, it has to be, I think this is going to be a long journey for all of us. At least in my country, I can definitely vouch for it. It will be a long battle and a hard one. Now, how do you view the role of tradition, spirituality, and cultural narratives in countering the spread of factory farming?
Well, in America, they don't counter, they reinforce factory farming. And those traditions have largely been set by industry. For example, Americans eat turkey on Thanksgiving, which is to celebrate when the Pilgrims came and they had their first Thanksgiving with Native Americans. But they didn't eat turkey. So it doesn't make any sense of why that's the tradition. I mean, they were on the East Coast and they are believed to have eaten waterfowl, venison, and seafood, including lobster. Not a turkey, nary a turkey to be found in that situation. So why is it that we all buy these giant turkeys that have been overfed and can't even hardly stand up and walk and put that on our plate and call it tradition? It's because we've been taught that. Traditions evolve over time. From the very beginning of time, people weren't doing these things. We developed all of these traditions and they change with the times. Sometimes people dig their heels in and want to do the same thing, but sometimes people can be brave and modify traditions, especially when those traditions are not in alignment with their spiritual beliefs. Food is such an important part of tradition and culture that this is one of the hardest things to do, and it's one of the reasons that people really resist making that kind of change. And like I mentioned, Thanksgiving and Christmas and stuff here in the US, these traditional foods are what people expect to eat. And people think it's weird or they don't like it if they don't have those things that they're used to having every single Thanksgiving since they were a child. But recipes can be modified. We have plant-based items that simulate turkey or any of these other foods that we would want to have that are more appropriate for giving thanks or the spiritual component of any of these different things that we want to celebrate together with our family. So I would say that people have to be brave and find other ways to modify those traditions and make new traditions on their own that fit with their beliefs and values.
Absolutely. You just mentioned it, right? Since I have been, most of my life has been in the Far East or towards Hong Kong, China, and all these places. It's not only in US that for Thanksgiving, you have a turkey. In China, in Hong Kong, because I've stayed a long time in Hong Kong as well. And during the Chinese New Year, they have this tradition of having the Peking duck, which I somehow still can't relate to. But since you deal in business with a lot of people, and you had to be there. So for me, I have seen different cultures performing different things. Since I've been in the Middle East, I wouldn't call it Middle East, but since I've been in the Arab world, Dubai and Saudi, over there they have different cultures. So I have seen, but I somehow still can't comprehend, why do you have to have a meat? You have to kill a being. That is also a living being at the end of the day, just to satisfy our taste buds. And what you spiritually said, I don't want to go out of the context, but I think none of the spiritual teachers, or even if you take, for that instance, Christ or any of these prophets or saints who came down, I don't think any of them came down and told you that it was okay to kill another living being just to satisfy our taste buds. But I think the narratives over the period, as you rightly said, has just changed and evolved, and it has become to the convenience of a few, and we all follow it blindly without questioning it.
Yeah, every single culture has ceremonies and traditions that align with food. Celebrations always involve food. For example, Chinese weddings always have shark fin soup, and we know, how detrimental that is to our oceans and, killing all of these predators that keep the cycle of the ocean going. And, like you said, all these different places. So the thing is getting through to people and making them understand and giving themselves permission not to do this anymore. They don't have to do it just because everybody else is doing it. It's social pressure again, and it's very hard to make these types of changes, especially with your kids. You don't want them to be the odd kid that doesn't, have this or that and does things differently, and they've got the weird mom and dad and all of that stuff. So, it's tough, but you can do it, and, just listen to your heart and do what aligns more with your values and your beliefs.
Absolutely. What you said, the odd person out. I have been the odd man out for a very, very long time. At a lot of these social events, because I don't drink, no alcohol, I don't believe in drinking or even having meat. And I think over the period, I'll be very honest, in a way, yes, I have evolved. My friend circle has become very, very, very bare minimum, because I don't sit, eat and drink with them. But I think from my childhood, I think it was since I was 15, I have always been the odd person out. In the school, yes, when we used to go for functions and, even to people's birthdays, my first question would be, even when it was the cake, does it have egg? Because of the spiritual path that also we were on. And then my friends and their parents would look, what is this guy talking about? And because that's how it became, because that switch was very, very natural and normal for me. But I think for a lot of people, what you rightly said, you become the odd person out. But I think then you have to, I think I just grew up over it, and I think that's what has led me to where I am today.
Yeah, it's tough. And I commend you for that, because the social pressure is very difficult. Yeah. I mean, as humans, we want to, be with our other humans. We want to fit in. And a lot of these practices make us not fit in. So, I think that it's important to explain to friends and family respectfully and not in an accusatory way why you feel this way and why you want to do that. And you're not saying that they have to do that, but, just seeking some accommodation and just letting them know how it impacts you without preaching or, yelling at them or anything like that. And then, also find some people that are like-minded. So you have a support group there, your tribe that is also full of ethical vegans. And so it makes it easier to navigate those other circumstances where people don't do the same thing as you.
You rightly said. I always believe it's agree to disagree, but you don't have to force your point of view. Or every individual has their own point of view. Well, I'll be very honest. I'm on a show as well, but due to my mother, my dad, our family, because we were vegetarian, because of the spiritual reasons, and because we stopped drinking, I anyhow never got into drinking sort of thing. But since my dad also, got onto the path of the spirituality, and we were basically boycotted by all our relatives from my mother's side or my father's side. And we have lived, I think, we've come a long way. Never had that pressure of trying to fit in or, somehow I think it was the more of the spirituality path. And because of like you rightly said, have your tribe, because of the spiritual, the people that we are connected to. And since we follow the same thing of, those ethics that we need to follow, not to satisfy our taste buds, I think those have been the support system. But I think it is at the end of the day, we all humans have our own perspective. And I believe, not only I believe, I think even in spiritual context, it is very carefully said. You don't need to, if you look at, not out of context, but if you look at all the prophets and saints who came down even in human form, they didn't come to change you. They just brought the message, what it is all about. So it was not like they wanted to change the entire world. If you look at it today, people have this notion that we want to change the world, but you're not supposed to change the world. If that is what it was, it would have been a better place. But, that can be a debate for some other time. But it is all about being able to, as I always keep saying, agree to disagree. Maybe we don't agree on certain points, but we have to, still look at it from the other's perspective as well at a lot of times. And especially when it comes to being, to our other sentient beings who are there, at least if you can't do any good, don't harm them. At least that is something, we all can do.
It's important to be empathetic and to lead by example.
Absolutely. Now, what role can law student and young lawyers in India play in building an animal law movement against industrial agriculture?
That is a really good question. So law students have a lot of power. They're learning all of the laws that they're going to apply for other purposes, even if they're not animal lawyers. And one thing that I've noticed here in the United States is animal law is every type of law. Animals are property. They are in contract law. There's all these, they're in criminal law. They're in family law when it comes to divorces or estate planning. So think outside the box and don't just think about animal law as its own individual type of subdiscipline. That said, it is a growing subdiscipline as well. So animal law in the United States is specialized into different areas. There are people that focus on factory farming or industrial animal ag. There are people that focus on personhood or standing for animals, animal rights in that sense. There is a focus on companion animals. There's also a subdiscipline focus on animals used in research. So there are a lot of different opportunities to get involved. Law students can petition for an animal law class at their law school if they don't already have one. They can get involved in legal clinics to try to make change while they're still in law school. So there are a lot of different things that they can do to be involved. I mean, here in the United States, we have, animal law clubs that are in law schools, like some are sponsored by the Animal Legal Defense Fund. They have student chapters, so they could even start some sort of club. Now, if you can't get an animal law class taught at your school, another thing that you could do is here in the United States in law school, you have to write a long research paper as part of your program. So if you have a research paper that you have to write and you get to choose your topic, you could choose to explore some of the laws in India that impact animals and drill down on it and come up with some solutions. And that could even be published in a law journal later if you do a great job writing it. So there are a lot of things that students can do to get involved.
That's really a good advice for a lot of students, I'm sure. Once we put it out, there would be, people who can look at it with a different perspective. Now, how do grassroots campaigns differ from courtroom battles in creating systematic change in animal agriculture?
So grassroots campaigns don't require any special credentials. You don't have to be a lawyer to start a grassroots campaign. You just have to be passionate about a topic and willing to make change and put in the effort to do that. So you can get started with anything such as a ballot initiative or just protesting outside of a lab or protesting, the use of animals in industrial animal ag. Any of those things. You can raise awareness when people don't have any understanding of some of these different practices and educate the public on that. Sometimes grassroots activism might turn into a courtroom battle. You never know. So there is that chance, and attorneys have an opportunity and they can support grassroots activists when they get in trouble. Maybe, here in the United States, there's a freedom of speech issue and they get arrested or something like that. And the attorney can defend them and say, okay, this is a traditional public forum and they were allowed to be doing their speech here and stuff like that. So there's a lot of overlap in some of these things. When the grassroots different groups grow, they can go in a lot of different directions, and they can even go into legislation as far as trying to come up with bills and work with the legislature to pass some of these things to make improvements for animal welfare or animal rights.
That's very rightly said, freedom of speech. That's something, even though in India we talk about freedom of speech, but currently we are having an issue with that as well. So we have to be very careful with what we speak or what we say. If it is going to hurt the sentiment of some of the stakeholders, we could be asking for trouble at this point in time.
That's true.
Now, could collaborations between India and American law experts create stronger resistance against factory farming multinationals?
Yeah, I definitely think so. So even though the laws are different, there might be some overlap when it comes to international import and export and stuff like that, looking for violations there. But then also just helping Indian lawyers understand the systems that are being rolled out in India when it comes to vertical integration, to understand who the stakeholders are and who's responsible for what part of the process. So, for example, if you have a large dairy CAFO and there is a manure lagoon and that lagoon is breached and spills and pollutes local water sources, who's responsible? Is it the vertical integrator, that is the big company that's dictating the contract? Or is that the contract farmer? Or are they both responsible? So looking at some of these things and figuring them out before they happen. Also developing different types of templates to bring these cases to make it easier, playbooks to figure out the order of events, to figure what you need to do to bring those lawsuits, to make it really simple for lawyers that might not be focused on animal law or necessarily even environmental law to bring these types of cases, and just having those key learning from each other to move the ball forward. Because animal laws coming up in India right now, it's more established in the United States. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate.
Absolutely. I think it is high time. And what you rightly said, it is the right time for us, in India to look at animal laws with a very different lens altogether, because we are still way back in 1960s, which was the British law. So we still, we'll talk about that after the show, how we can move it into the country, or how we can get people involved. Now, with growing awareness of climate change, do you see governments eventually phasing out or heavily regulating factory farming worldwide?
Well, because the industry is really powerful, I don't see that on the horizon anytime soon. Once these practices are entrenched in a society, it's really hard to turn back the clock. You see that in the United States, the lobbyists for these different industrial animal ag companies are extremely powerful. And if this spreads in India, you can sort of expect the same thing. And with that scaled up industrial animal agriculture and increase in products, they're just going to make more money and be more powerful. It's going to be hard to phase those things out. Now, in some countries, there's been progressive legislation to try to stop or ban factory farming. Switzerland had an initiative to do that a few years ago. Unfortunately, it didn't pass, but importantly, it brought a lot of attention to the issue. And sometimes you might try for legislation and it might not get passed, but then over time, the public may warm to it and decide that it's a good idea. And even if they don't pass that specific legislation, maybe something else comes out of it. For example, Switzerland has a new labeling law for welfare labels that will expose which products came from animals who were subjected to cruel treatment, such as debudding horns and stuff like that, painful treatments. So consumers can look at those products and decide, hey, I don't want to eat that. So even though they didn't pass the factory farming ban, they are doing some other things that are raising consumer awareness and could lead to a ban in the future. So even though the government may not want to put forth these laws to ban factory farming and help curb climate change, that doesn't mean that the public shouldn't resist and bring attention to these things. Even if those changes are going to be incremental, they can lead to major change in the future. But it's really hard to stop things once they're entrenched. So I would say that this is a call to awareness in India with the expansion of these factory farms to try to stop them before that is the normal mode of business there.
Well, let's see if we can, get the stakeholders to understand the devastating effects of these factory farm that is going to harm us in not only with the environment but with the animals. But as you have rightly said, the lure for money is going to be the important factor out here. And I think, as you rightly said, all these major industrial corporations are very powerful, and I think they might just get their way out here as well.
Yeah, and the scary thing is that a lot of times contract farmers don't really understand what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah.
Here in the United States, because they need to adhere to that contract, their facilities may need to be upgraded. They may need to make a lot of changes and spend a lot of money to be able to meet the terms of that contract so that they can be a producer for, the big company. And a lot of times here, farmers will go into millions of dollars worth of debt. The contract farmers get paid based on their rankings. So if they are not producing as much, they won't get paid as much per unit or per animal, whatever it is that they're producing. They might not even be able to pay their loans. And so that's a scary underbelly for this stuff that may not be evident to people that are considering going into a contract farming agreement with big companies in India. So looking at what has happened in the US, this could be a big problem for factory farming there.
Absolutely. It could be an eye-opener for a lot of people. Now, how can individuals, consumers, citizens, and professionals play a role in resisting factory farming in India today?
Well, we talked about grassroots stuff and we talked about attorneys and law students, but you don't necessarily have to go those routes to make change and get involved. You should think about what your unique skills are and how you can use those skills to benefit anti-industrial animal ag movements. That might be doing something like if you're a marketing executive, helping with some marketing materials, with an organization or something like that. It could be if you're a journalist, exposing some of these things, writing about them and talking about what has happened, what the impacts on the community were, putting it in the public eye, because a lot of these things are hidden behind closed doors. If you work at a large corporation that has a cafeteria, you could petition to make everything plant-based by default and then have meat or dairy add-ons so that all the foods are inclusive to everybody that works there. If you put meat and dairy at the end of the buffet line, people take less of it, and it can be a way to reduce consumption of those products. Other ideas are to do the same thing in school cafeterias or hospitals. And hospitals are especially important because the people are there because they're sick and they need to recover. So let's feed them healthy food while they're there. And even things as easy as meatless Mondays, which we've done here in the United States at a lot of places, but it should be just a totally plant-based Monday, without dairy or eggs or anything like that. So there's a lot of things that you can get involved in personally without, going full-time as a grassroots activist or, just rushing out to go to law school to work on some of these problems. Think locally and think about what your skill set is, and then look for ways to apply that.
That's a very nice advice to a lot of listeners. Now, coming to my last question, if you could envision an ideal food system for India that honors animals, people, and the planet, what would it look like?
Well, that's a really good question. And as someone who is not from India, it's really, a tough one for me to answer. But what I will say is that the concept of ahimsa is very important. You don't want to do any violence to animals. And when we look at industrial animal agriculture, a lot of it is based on the female animal body through artificial insemination, egg laying. All of these things are very violent and very aggressive, and it doesn't fit in with the cultural beliefs of the majority of people in India. The only way forward to honor animals and honor, what we should be doing with them and not hurting the environment any more than we already have is to go to an ethically plant-based food system. It will allow us to feed more people. India has the most cropland in the world. Second is the United States. Now, what is that cropland going to be used for? Is it going to be used to grow feed for animals that produce less food than if you would use it for a crop that is based for human consumption? So there are a lot of nutritious things that you could plant and solve food insecurity issues if you grow food and not feed. So that is a worldwide problem. India doesn't need to be growing corn and soy to feed, dairy cattle. That same amount of food could really spread a long way and help with malnutrition and food insecurity. So I think that that's really important. And right now, India is on a precipice of going the direction of factory farming. It is not a hugely entrenched system right there. American companies are chasing profits and they're looking to deploy these things in the global south. And, the main question is, what's going to happen next? Is India going to accept this? It's a matter of whether India is going to lead or if India is going to follow.
That's a very, very good question for all of us, and especially for the stakeholders. Now, as we've come to the end of this show, this is where I leave it like an open mic for the guests to talk their heart out. If there is a project they want us, want the listeners to support, or a fundraise appeal, that's all up to you. Now, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. So as you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, I'm the president and founder of Three Pearls Charities. It's a small charity that I started to work on passion projects and doing different things, like I have a case for a military warhorse named Sergeant Reckless. We also support other organizations. Currently, I am working on the first co-sponsored conference focused on artificial intelligence, animals, and the law, to be held at GW Law School, which will be on November 7th through 9th. But there is free registration online, so if you are international and you want to stream it, you can. You can check out our website, and then some of the information that I provided also has my email address. You can reach me there, and you can reach me on LinkedIn.
Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time out. Really, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anil. It's been my pleasure.